My name is Julie Mignot. I'm the Enterprise Account Exec at CDW Canada, based in Montreal, but born and raised in Ottawa, fière franco-ontarienne. Donc, s'il y a des questions en français, I'll be able to answer your questions. It's my pleasure to be your host today. I've been in this tech industry for over 20 years, 14 ans chez CDW. I've had the pleasure of having front row seat to many technology advancements. The era we find ourselves in today feels as thrilling as it is overwhelming. AI is on the path to changing the way we work and live. My customers are looking to experts in the industry to help them navigate these complexities, to help maximize the benefits. CDW has those experts, and we've paired them with our technology partners that are here today in order to help you achieve your desired business outcomes. And I'm looking forward to today's agenda to showcase this for you. Without further ado, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming CDW's General Manager and Vice President, Janak Alford.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to be in the company of such a remarkable group of leaders and change makers. Your work is what defines Canada as a global leader of AI innovation and governance. I also want to extend my gratitude to Dell Canada and our event partners and sponsors. This fantastic event wouldn't have been possible without you. Thank you. Today, we're discussing a topic that is critical to the future of our economy, our productivity, and our reputation as innovators: artificial intelligence. At CDW Canada, we continue to deepen our commitment to fostering AI solutions. We see its vast potential, not only in improving productivity, but in elevating our country's unique public sector operations. To realize the full potential of AI, we need to understand the current landscape. How are IT decision makers using AI in public sector? What are some of the opportunities and barriers in bringing their AI vision to life? Over the past few years, we've been conducting proprietary research to better understand how Canadian organizations are using AI and measure AI's potential, as well as limitations. These findings inform our AI strategy, which in turn results in tangible outcomes for our customers. Interestingly, our 2024 Canadian Hybrid Cloud Report found that data management and governance is one of the primary barriers for large-scale AI tool adoption. Further, the top 3 challenges identified with data management are securing data, managing data complexity, and simplifying data access and consumption. These data points are critical as it highlights the need to establish proper governance to successfully adopt and implement AI solutions. At CDW, we differentiate our AI strategy by categorizing tools based on the stakeholders they serve. We have 4 distinct stakeholder groups, each with their own AI tools and needs: the team, the individual, the entity or organization, and the external customer or third party. As a quick example, when we look at AI for individuals, tools like Microsoft Copilot can help create efficiencies by summarizing, creating, and classifying information. The risk profile here is minimal as the scope provides greater access to the person's own data. However, when we look at tools for organizations, these often deliver broader access to data, multiple data sets, and sensitive data. In this case, the risk profile is significantly higher and requires more robust data management and governance frameworks. By focusing on targeted use cases and organizational outcomes, it enables CDW to better serve our customers by aligning the correct tools with secure data while creating clear risk profiles for the implementation of AI assets. As we all know, governance of our citizens' data is key. Our AI strategy is built on 3 foundational pillars. First, tangible AI outcomes. We make AI real for you. This means working closely with organizations to take AI from concept to execution through material use cases that address real-world challenges. To support individual AI tools and needs, our team helps enable tools like Microsoft Copilot and provides training and workshops for seamless adoption. Zooming out, for entities and organizations, we develop more mature AI solutions that manage sensitive data across multiple platforms while ensuring robust data governance and security. Our solutions extend even further to external customers and third-party stakeholders. Not only do we help manage the platforms for vast AI operations, we also work to mitigate the potential reputational risks that come with deploying AI tools externally. Through our partnerships with leading organizations, we work to ensure that every AI tool our customers implement is secure. From individual data assistance to organizational-wide AI frameworks, our strategy is compliant and tailored to meet specific needs. So this brings us to our second pillar, partnerships. Over the past 2 decades, we've fostered strong relationships with the world's leading technology companies. These partnerships allow us to deliver the best AI solutions for our shared customers today, tomorrow, and well into the future. Together, we're driving the AI economy forward in Canada. Our partnership with Dell Technologies has been instrumental in this regard. Dell's cutting-edge HPC solutions enable our mutual customers to accelerate AI research and development by processing large data sets faster, which is essential for training AI models and conducting advanced research. Their solutions also optimize AI workloads, allowing organizations to run AI algorithms more efficiently, leading to quicker insights and better decision-making. By leveraging Dell's advanced technologies, we ensure that our AI strategy meets the growing demands of our clients, helping them innovate and stay competitive in the rapidly evolving tech landscape. Together, we've built some of Canada's largest supercomputers, demonstrating our leadership, expertise, and experience in this rapidly changing technology space. We continue to support our customers with their AI journey, helping to build future capacity that will enable Canadians to access critical AI resources to accelerate research, science, and innovation. And the final pillar, our amazing team. Our AI strategy is made possible by dedicated support teams. From initial workshops focused on defining desired outcomes to designing the architecture for an AI assistant to organization-wide implementation and deployment. The CDW team works seamlessly to ensure AI adoption is successful and sustainable. As we move forward with today's discussions, I want to emphasize that this journey is more than just technology. It's about building the right foundation for success, one that ensures AI is implemented in a way that supports the mission-critical work that you're doing. Together, I'm confident that we can deliver solutions that make a real difference for the organizations, teams, and citizens we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Janak. I am very lucky to be working with the CDW HPC team in Montreal, where we've built big clusters that are very difficult to understand from someone that's not part of the HPC world. But we have a full bilingual team, I had to say out loud, that is available to you. So thanks, Janet, for that. We're going to go on to the second course, and we'll be back for the keynote speaker. Thank you. We are now thrilled to welcome our keynote speaker, Janak Alford, Deputy Minister of Technology and Innovations for the Government of Alberta. Janak?
All right, mic's on. Well, it seems like everyone's eating, so it's great. So I didn't want to stand between people and their food because that's not a good place to stand. But thank you for the opportunity. I want to give a big thanks to CDW for all of the work to put this event on. And it's exciting to be here. The topics are exciting, and I look forward to sharing some insights around what I'll be looking to do out in Alberta, but also informed by my work in the federal government as well. So you can't ask me too many tough questions about the job in Alberta. I only started last week. So everything I say, I'll claim ignorance and beg forgiveness. But I'm happy to give a presentation that I hope will be more general around speaking towards some of the challenges and opportunities in the public service around AI. And I also wanted to, also thank all of the sponsors and the participants. I had a chance to do a fun podcast that was put on. We had it hosted by KJ over there, and I got to talk to James from Dell, and so that was a great warm up to this. And so I hope you have a chance to check it out. There's a lot more depth there than we'll get to talk about in this presentation, but so a big thanks. And so I'm gonna dive in. And I hope my clicker clicks. Oh, there we got a clicker clicking. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of a different perspective, but I call this a pathway to AI for the public service and making public service AI ready. And so I'll walk through a little bit. Just to give a bit of context, like I said, I just started the role as Deputy Minister of Technology and Innovation out in Alberta last week. And I was pleasantly surprised when I got there to see how much preparatory work had been done by the government of Alberta. And it was directly in line with the presentation that we had to kick off the day, talking immediately about protecting data, privacy. So Alberta is implementing some of the strongest privacy protections in Canada. There's new legislation coming out that would make Alberta a very clear data and privacy approach. There's a strong data strategy at play, and you cannot have an AI strategy without having your data in order, and none of us do. So we have a lot of work to get our data in order in the next little while. From a technology standpoint, they're kind of where I would say they're very similar to where the federal public service departments that I've been speaking to are. A lot of evaluation, a lot of testing, a lot of developing metrics for AI, exploring use cases. By no means is this a solved subject, nor will it be for the next little while at least. The use cases around AI are definitely still evolving. But they also have an ecosystem. And I'll say it's quite fascinating getting out there, not being aware of any of these participants in the ecosystem before I went. So they've established a GovLab where AI companies and researchers, post-secondaries and private sector can come together and solve government challenges with AI. It's a pretty innovative approach. They're investing over $200 million a year in startups through Alberta Innovates. They have, the University of Alberta has one of the top AI labs in the world. And they also have a couple of other, AMI, which is their machine learning institute, and then AltaML, which is one of the leading machine learning organizations. So they've partnered to create an ecosystem there, and now they're drawing from that. And so I think that there's a lesson to be learned here, because I'm a big proponent on industry coming forward with solutions, but public service needs to go out and share challenges in a more transparent way so that we can build big ideas and explore these things together. And that's one area where I think the public service could go farther to bring those opportunities forward. So those are a few things. Those are not just available in Alberta. I would encourage people who are in the federal public service to be aware of those things. GovLab, for example, can help any of us on our AI and government business challenges as well. So today, I wanted to talk about some of the challenges, and I wanted to give you a kind of a different lens towards making a public service organization AI ready and how AI comes and augments our operations. And there's three things I wanted to kick off with to tell you about challenges. And so, maybe it's not a great idea to start with the problems, but let's get that stuff addressed. Let's get that stuff out of the way so we can kind of focus on solutions. And I think the three defining challenges for a public service organization are process challenges, corporate knowledge challenges, and then benefits definition. And sure, we have privacy and security. Those challenges will always be there. But these are the ones that I think will actually stand between your organization and making real use of the technology as it presents itself. So we're going to start with the first one, process challenges. And speaking of process challenges, does it click? There we go. There's a process challenge right there. So despite being process intensive, or maybe because of it, it's not easy to define the work that we do. So we have our if you go into any public service organization, you go into any unit in there, they'll have tons of processes, but a lot of them are not documented. A lot of these processes live in people's minds. So when you want to sit down and talk about AI and you want to sit down and talk about use cases, it's so difficult to get a starting point because the fundamental information is either, it mostly exists in people's minds, but you have out-of-date information. That's a big challenge. A lot of processes have been systematized, meaning that they're enforced by a tool or a workflow or an app, but they're not, again, so they're reinforced by technology. But they're not, again, structured in a sense that a system can understand it. And then the processes are highly interpretive, which means that if you have two different individuals do the same task, they might do it in a different way. And if you have the same individual do the task twice, they might do it in a different way each time. And so if you were to leverage AI, you would need to be able to dive in and solve some of these process challenges. And so I think what we're lacking is we're lacking a structured language to explain to ourselves and AI what we're trying to achieve. And this will speak to some of the initial poor experiences that people have when leveraging AI, because they say, oh, the AI didn't really resonate. The output didn't resonate with me. That's number one thing business people will say right away. Well, you didn't give it enough context to be any good, right? You didn't tell it who you were, and you didn't tell it what you do, and nor could it mimic that because all of that information's up here, and it's not anywhere else. The second big challenge is along that side is corporate knowledge. And we talked about the challenges around data. Yes, you want to protect your systems, that's table stakes. But if you look at the proliferation of data, there is no way AI can make meaningful use of that information. It is too spread out, it's too inconsistent. So you've got inconsistent formats, you've got tacit knowledge, things that you think people know but no one knows. You have recorded knowledge, but it's really hard to find. It's buried in GC Docs, it's buried in RDIMS, it's buried on the SharePoint, it's all over the place. And you have out-of-date knowledge, which 50% of all of our data is rot, it's redundant, obsolete, or transitory. And you also have valid out-of-date knowledge, so point-in-time information. So imagine you're doing an old case from 5 years ago. Well, you need what was the process, the regulatory framework, the policies from 5 years ago to solve the case 5 years ago. So you have a lot of out-of-date information, incompatible systems, proprietary systems, your data's locked up, and then incompatible data sets. So you went from one ERP, you went to another ERP, you went to another ERP, and guess what? You still have all three of them, but there's breaks between it, and you really can't unlock it. So we have a massive corporate knowledge problem. And I think it's an opportunity. So everywhere I'm saying challenge is an opportunity, because this is where I'd like to see industry coming forward and addressing this a bit more holistically as a partner. And then the third one, which is kind of interesting, is benefits articulation. And I know in the podcast, James, you spoke a little bit about this around talking to customers, looking at use cases. People have tons of use cases, but they have no readily available way of articulating what they're trying to achieve. Is it efficiency? Maybe. Is it satisfaction? Maybe. So I think we need to get much more clear about those things. So a few challenges here. It's not really, the public service is not very geared towards risk takers. So if you take a risk, there's very little benefit in taking a risk in the public service, and yet we need those risk takers to be enabled to go and try things and not and them not to be demonized if it doesn't initially work, because we're exploring together here. So we need to think about that. There's also not enough time to learn. In the public service, you're so operationally focused, you've got so many things on the go. No one's sitting back and saying, well, I guess I have a couple of weeks to just think about AI and test things. So we need to create space, and there's not a very compelling motivation for workers to learn AI. So key fear number one, AI won't reduce my workload. I'll just be expected to do more. Doesn't sound very fun. And two, maybe AI will reduce my workload and it will reduce my paycheck because it'll just replace me. So I think that's key fear number two. So we need to address those things. And I don't think that collectively we've articulated some of those things. And the third thing I want to talk about, and then I'll move off the negative and I'll move into more positive and constructive, is there's some unresolved issues here around the use of this technology, right? So generative AI is a mimicry machine. Are we okay with that? Do we think that a system should learn the way humans learn? Should it be able to read other works, other people's work, and be able to develop new knowledge? Maybe. That's what I do. That's what we all do. We all get paid very well to absorb information, put it into a new structure, and push it back out. And the best of us do that seamlessly. But if systems do that, and we call it copyright infringement and things like that, we haven't come to terms with these. And we really need to debate this. This is really important for the public service to come up to a consensus at a policy level around the use of these systems. We also talk about enablement and things like that. But really, a lot of the use cases we talk about, AI is amplifying what we're already doing. So do we want amplification or do we want perfection? So this is a really important question. Do you want your AI system to be right 100% of the time? Or do you want it to be right kind of like how humans are right? Not 100% of the time, but be okay with that. Because, and again, it goes into the bottom one, which we'll get to in a minute. We all in this room have a pretty different conception, I think, of what AI is doing, not only technologically, but what it can do for us as organizations. And I think we need to have more broad conversations about that. I don't think we have consensus about any of these things. I'd like to see a lot more debate, discussion, podcasts, whatever you want to do. And then the final one is trust. So I've read a lot of AI policies recently. They talk about bias, and then they talk about human in the loop, and they talk about all these other things. Very few of them have come up with a trust framework. So how much do you trust the output? Does it have to be 100% output for you to trust what the AI is telling you, generative AI? I don't think so. But somewhere between 0 and 100%, there has to be a relative marker that we're going to be okay with. And so I think we should have a dialogue around that, right? We don't trust any human to be 100%, and yet somehow things happen. So I think we need to come up with a trust approach for the public service so that we can communicate to our stakeholders. So I want you to do a little bit of a thought experiment. And now I'm going to start to move into how to think about this in kind of an interesting and different way. If you want to unlock the potential for AI for your organization in the public service, we have to start to think about the roles of the individuals that make up the organization. So I'm going to give you a thought experiment for both for employees, managers, and senior leaders. So in your job today, your job as an employee is, you might say that your job is you do the task that your manager tells you to do. Okay, well, here's your PMA, here's your operational plan, go and do those things. Your job as a manager may be to monitor those staff and measure those outputs. Seems reasonable. Are the staff doing what I told them to say? Is it happening? And then the third is your job as a senior leader maybe to set the vision and communicate that down to your team. Okay, well, these are the broad strategies we want to approach. These are the priorities of government. So if you wanted to start to think differently, I would frame this differently. What if your job as an employee was not to do the work? It was to understand the processes and cure every piece of knowledge critical to doing the work. So what if you didn't do the task? You reframe work not to do the task. Not that I'm saying stop, but just take it through a thought experiment for a second. What if your job as a manager was to establish the measurements, but not to direct the tasks anymore? And then what if your job as a senior leader was no longer to develop the strategy? Maybe you're not the best at developing the strategy. Maybe there is a niche here for AI, but is to allocate the resources to make your team most effective, right? And those resources may be money, those resources may be people. It could be any number of things, but it's the accumulation of capital, knowledge capital or otherwise, that will make your organization successful. So we have to start to reframe the roles that we want to play in the midst of AI. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how this might work. So if we start to consider human roles, and I apologize, the green font shows up horribly on the screen, but if we start to consider the human roles, just like I talked about, I want to give you one more thought experiment. What if, in your organization, let's say you have 500 people in your organization, what if you had a 2x boost in the number of people in your organization, but they don't know what you know? They're brand new. Or what if you had 10 times as many people in your organization? Well, this is the way I want you to think about how to integrate AI into your organization. This is an interesting way to think about it. It's an untapped, unsophisticated workforce that you need to elevate and you need to make work. And yeah, I think we'd all love twice as many people in our team, but one of the challenges that people have is they don't have enough time to hire new people and train them. And that's the same challenge they're going to have with AI. So if we were to think of AI in these kind of personified terms, we might create a new human resources branch, which would bring these people on. It would onboard them. It would give them job titles. It would give them tasks and responsibilities. So imagine an artificial resources unit in your organization that's just responsible for managing personified AIs, new members of your team, which are digital. We compensate people for the work. Why don't we compensate, again, I'm trying to get you to think a little bit differently. Why don't we compensate the AI workers? Could we? Could we apply a monetary or a performance-based compensation for how performant these things are? Well, that's an interesting way to pay industry, right? So bring on workers, we're going to hire them, we're going to manage them as employees, and we're going to pay them. Maybe not as humans, but we're going to pay them, and that money will go through to the teams that create it. And so we're going to give them bonuses, we're going to manage that. And then we're going to manage them through performance management. We're going to measure them. And again, this goes into a different way of applying that. So if we adopt a workforce mindset, we can start to see how we can bring in AI as this new capability to augment your workforce and not to replace your workforce. And so to take on this approach, I want you to think of a persona, and a persona being defined as all of the processes, knowledge, metrics, priorities, and standards needed to do a task. If you were to gather that information today, and you were to leverage one of the readily available large language models, you would have that model largely capable of augmenting your teams. They're not there today because we don't have the knowledge, processes, priorities, standards, and metrics to feed into the system. That doesn't exist, and so we can't take advantage of this stuff. So if we were to start to map out these things, we could map out the role personas, so those kind of like a job description, employee personas. So who are the people who work for your organization? You can map out personas for the AI assistants or agents, and then you can even map out a persona for your organization. So if that existed, if you brought all of this together, you would be able to communicate effectively what your organization is trying to achieve. and you'd be able to start to take on challenges like this. So I'm going to give you an applied example. I want you to think about Susan, who's a database administrator. So Susan says, I can't get this project done because the database I'm using is out of support. I've told my manager this so many times, and I just can't get it moving. I've identified a need to do procurement. I haven't been trained on the new cloud replacement solution, and management doesn't understand that pushing ahead is going to cause massive problems, right? That's how an employee would feel. So they're not super interested in adopting AI because AI is not really going to help solve that problem the way that we've been thinking about it. Dale, the manager, says, staff don't seem open to change. I've been asking them to try new things, but timelines are tight. I don't have the capacity to send my resources on training. I'm too busy dealing with issues, and I'm under a lot of pressure. And Terry, who's the senior leader, says, you know what, the organizational maturity here is pretty low. Staff don't understand what's at risk. If we don't get the project done, we'll lose our funding. Staff, they're ignoring my strategic direction. They're not implementing my KPIs. And they all say at the bottom, I don't want to fail, but I need support. And so the reason why things are challenging, and again, the green text is impossible to read, but if you look, this is a diffuse landscape of what we have to take on in the public service. So you have Susan there, she has Dale and the manager and Terry up at the top, but it's really far more complex because you've got training and change management, product delivery, technical solutions, procurement, policy, treasury, finance, performance management, and governance. Those all have some role to play here, but to get Susan the patch for, or the upgrade for her database, well, we need to do a procurement, which is driven by policy, which is driven by funding, which is driven by the technical system, and we don't have the training to do that. And so we have all these compound breakdowns to do something really simple. Terry doesn't understand why the project is stalled, and Susan doesn't have the language to articulate it in strategic terms. And so we have this big breakdown, so simple things don't happen. So I apologize, this is a messy diagram, but what I've overlaid here is where you should be thinking about bringing AI in to change things. And I've added a lot more people, digital people, AI personas to this mapping. But what we start to get is we start to fill the gaps on organizational achievement. So, well, there's Susan. She doesn't have time for training, but there's a new worker, an AI worker, who creates a bespoke training plan for Susan for 30 minutes a day. So we can't send you on training, but we're going to give you a custom tutor. She doesn't have the technical, the procurement knowledge to put forward an RFP or to buy a new database. So for procurement, it fills a gap. It writes the proposal. She doesn't, from a technical system standpoint, it proposes, have you considered alternatives? Maybe you don't need a database upgrade. Maybe there's something else you can do. Maybe there's things you haven't considered. And so all the way through the organization, if you look at this, you have the opportunity to augment an AI-enabled workforce that's not replacing anybody. It's filling the gaps where the passing of the baton of responsibility between teams is breaking down. And this is a phenomenal way to think about how to apply it. Because everybody wants something, and the time it takes, the time debt that is incurred going from one area to the other, we can bridge that. And we can shrink that down. And so what you have is you have the same organization of people, you have a new workforce that's completely distributed out through your organization. And so, in a sense, you can have this workforce as your translator. Susan likes being a database administrator. She went to university for it. She's been at it for 20 years. She loves it. She's very passionate. So ancillary tasks, the things that stop us all from being productive, when I'm a database administrator, but I have to write an RFP for a new database, I don't know anything about that, I don't want to do it, can fill that role. Concerns that she raised can be escalated up and spoken in the language of the senior management. They don't know about Oracle 12, okay? They don't know, they won't know, but they can understand issues and how those can be grouped and addressed through strategy. We can coordinate between different teams, and Susan gets to unlock new skills. Her value as an employee increases, not decreases due to AI, because she's being coached and she's learning new things and she's growing in her role. And meanwhile, Terry on the other side, suddenly all of the thousands of issues inherent in her organization are becoming grouped together, strategically streamlined into different buckets that she can take on and actually do something about. So it's not 1,000 independent issues, it's types of issues. She now understands change resistance. She now understands the risks that she's facing, and she's looking and she's seeing performance. And so Terry has a deeper understanding. And so what we have is the ability to bridge these gaps in understanding and create a very different kind of public service. And I stole this off the internet. I know Microsoft's here. I know. I don't understand. We gave them Copilot. So thanks, LinkedIn, who gave that to me. So in terms of organizations becoming AI-enabled, this presentation was called Pathway to AI. These are the principles that I would encourage. There's 8 of them here. Stay open. It's too early to lock into a vendor. And I think that as a community, the public service organizations have a responsibility to each other to be a lot more transparent about how you're doing, what's working, what use cases are working, what's the secret sauce. There's no one formula. We have to share. Don't forget your architecture. We spent the last, how long? While trying to come up with, don't make everything, don't big bang, don't boil the ocean, keep it modular, keep it interoperable, open source, develop standards. The same thing applies for AI. So when we get to artificial general intelligence, this kind of monolithic genie that's going to come down and be able to do everything, that's an anti-pattern. That is an anti-pattern for the public service. You have to keep your architecture there. Take this idea of the personas and embed them into your organization. It will help your team understand, oh, well, I don't have to talk to procurement anymore. I have a persona that will write all of my procurement stuff. I just have to tell it my problems, and it can go and do that. Adopt an HR mindset. Measure performance. Put all of the principles of performance management, apply them to AI. We have to strengthen our core functions. So where are we weakest in an organization? We're weakest between teams. So that's where we would strengthen. Build out a trust framework. Use a scientific approach. Use statistics. Use a lot of iterative testing. Set a vision that makes sense for your employees. What's Monday morning like? And I would say for leaders in the room, you have to roll up your sleeves on this one. No one's going to be able to tell you consistently what the opportunity is for your organization. I really encourage you to dive in and test and pilot these things yourself. So to wrap it up, the last thing I'll say, which is a little bit of an invitation for folks, both in the public and private sector, is let's build an ecosystem here. We are separate public service organizations. We are all trying to do the exact same thing in silos on this. I think there's more we can do. I think we can be more collaborative. I think we can be more engaged. So let's start to put out our challenges. Let's start to share what we're doing. Test, and then share the results. We need to be able to push those things out there. Manage costs. I think we can do this effectively in partnership with the vendor community, and I think that there's some strategies there. Engage. We have to find some outside. We got to bring talent into the public service. We've only really seen the tip of the iceberg in terms of the opportunity here. Test fast, and then let's discuss and debate. So I would say I'm looking forward for any opportunities to collaborate deeply and openly with any organization in the room who's excited to explore these things. And the caveat being, we have to share the results and successes back to each other. So that would be my invitation for everyone. I hope it was at least an interesting insight into a mindset towards adopting AI. And I'll be happy to unpack this at the panel discussion coming up in a little bit. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. It was extremely insightful. The slide that hit me the most was the applied example, where AI is not replacing any jobs, something that we're so scared of, but actually creating jobs, in my opinion. So, which is, what fits perfectly for our next speaker. So please join me in welcoming Field Chief Technology Officer at Dell Technologies, James Scott. James has been instrumental in assisting clients worldwide with the design, security, and maintenance of multi-cloud environments. and he plays a pivotal role in how organizations are looking to deploy and leverage artificial intelligence to drive productivity and simply business operations. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much. So yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I will echo the comments. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here today. I want to focus a little bit on the session here on how do we accelerate things. I think there's a lot of interest in AI. In my role, I get to talk to customers and partners across the country in just about every sector and vertical on what challenges are they facing. How do we make sure we line up the right resources to support them on their journey over the next 6, 12, 36 months. I haven't walked into I don't think a single meeting in the last 24 months where AI hasn't been top of that list and the impact and change it's having on the rest of the IT landscape. But for me, while I love having these visionary discussions, while I love thinking about, well, where is this going to take us over the next 12 to 24 months, I'm also keen to focus on what can we do in the next 6 weeks to try and accelerate and actually drive some change around AI. And that's what I want to focus on during the session today. And everywhere I go, there's interesting AI use cases. As I said, I think probably everyone in this room is thinking about how AI is going to change the landscape, the role that they do. They're looking at how can I use AI to improve my role and my organization. I think broadly speaking, there are 4 different categories here. There's the use of AI to try and grow and expand. I see a lot of smaller organizations able to do a huge amount more than they could even just 6 to 12 months ago because of some of the systems and tools that they're implementing. Probably the biggest area and where we are spending a lot of time today with organizations across the country is in that enhancing experience and access to technology and driving productivity improvements. I want to give some real examples of some of the work that's going on there. Where I get really excited is on the far right-hand side here, the role of innovation. And I think there's a huge opportunity here for AI to truly drive access and capabilities that were not even possible just 6 to 12 months ago. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that. But what I want to stress, and I think this is really, really important, I'm seeing this challenge everywhere, and I'll touch on some of what we're seeing in terms of POCs and actually moving AI into production and driving change today, not tomorrow, is access to metrics. I'm seeing, again, no shortage of AI pilots and POCs and projects being run. Again, I'm sure everyone in this room has something underway somewhere. What I want to stress is that we need metrics. We need to be able to measure those activities, and we need to be able to put a stake in the sand to say, this is what we're trying to do. Because if I'm trying to articulate to the rest of the business and the rest of the organization, this is what we're doing with AI, this is how we're implementing it into our workflow, this is how we're improving the lives, and I'll use the co-pilot example again. Like, that's great, but to what extent? What are the metrics that we're actually trying to improve and drive? Because we have to be able to show that up to the rest of the business. And I want to highlight 2 things that really struck home to me. One, and this is from CDW's cloud report this year, everyone is doing this. The vast majority of organizations have a plan in mind, or they're already investing in this space. But I would encourage everyone to think about those projects and make sure you're able to clearly define the metrics that we want to drive out of this. Again, I've seen no shortage of POCs where my first question is, well, what's the actual outcome? What are we trying to drive? What's the improvement in productivity we're looking for? How much faster do you think we can get this task done if we're able to implement this process or this routine? And there isn't that set of information out there. This was really struck home for me. I got the chance to sit down about 2 weeks ago with some of the folks from IDC, and they were doing a lot of work to examine AI projects across the country. And of the 33 that they dived into and they really examined the process and the rollout and the pilots that were going through, only 4 of those in the last 12 to 18 months had made it into production. So 12%. I think that number's far too low. And again, everything that we can do to try and improve that is I think, critically important. The other big finding that I thought was really interesting is, so they asked, organizations across the country, what can we do better? What's the bit that we're missing? How do we try and change this low percentage and improve things? And I was really pleased with the response we got back. Because to me, this is the thing that I think, again, a lot of organizations are struggling with today. It's AI platforms and AI infrastructure. And I want to talk about this in some detail. We don't just solve these AI challenges by throwing a bunch of infrastructure. We need the AI platforms to help us do and run these tasks day in and day out. But the whole reason that we're doing this is to try and drive innovation, trying to do something new, trying to do something interesting. And to me, and we've been doing our own studies across the country. We did one last year, we did it again this year. And I have stopped asking the question and asked people to raise their hands who's used ChatGPT or Copilot or anything else. I'm sure everyone's had a chance by now to play around with some of these tools. The statistic that's on the left-hand side is probably of no surprise to anybody. That number went up slightly between last year and this year, but everyone has had a chance to play with these tools. The piece that I think everyone should really double down and think about is the right-hand side of this slide. Everyone I talked to about these projects didn't get a chance to play with, again, Copilot or ChatGPT, all these tools, and think, oh, this is really going to improve my personal life. This is going to solve my challenges at home. Everyone used those tools and went, well, this would be great. If only the response was more tailored toward me. To Janak's point, most of these systems don't understand the role that you're in when you ask it the question. It doesn't come back and ask you for a series of clarifying questions most of the time. But everyone I talk to, every organization is saying, well, okay, how do I roll this into my organization and make it unique to my team and my business and my roles? And to me, this is really interesting. And this is different to most of the other technology inflections that we've seen over the last 20, 30 years. Because most of those inflections, if I think about things like the change from physical to virtual, even client server, the impact of hybrid, private, multi-public, poly-cloud deployments that are still under discussion today, those were all driven by the business or by the IT team. Okay, they weren't driven by the end users. Most of the end users that I talked to, they couldn't care less where their workload runs. They just want to be able to do their job. They want to be able to do it easier and better. This is different because not only do we now have the top level business coming down and saying, what are we doing in this space? How do we make sure we're keeping up? How do we make sure we're not left behind? We've also got the end users saying, I want access to these tools because I've had a chance to, again, use and play around with them, and they would dramatically improve my day-to-day activity. The other big difference here, and I get lots of questions on, I'm sure everyone's seen the classic kind of technical hype cycle. We get really excited about a technology, and then we hit what is typically called the trough of disillusionment. Like it seemed great, and actually reality sits in, and it's not quite the same. I think this is different for a number of reasons, but I want to pick on two of them. The first one is the axis along the bottom, speed. Okay, I have lots of questions and conversations about how big is this change going to be? How much of an impact is this going to have on daily life and society? Is this going to be like the impact that the internet had on everything that we do, on commerce, on interaction, on communication? I think it is, but I do not think it's going to take us 30 years to get there. Again, you think about how long it took us to go from DNS being ratified to launch of Google in the end of the 90s, the iPhone launched at the end of 2007. It took a long time for that impact to really change society fairly fundamentally. I do not think AI is going to have that same impact. The other interesting one for me, and this is where I think we do need to move a bit faster and focusing on the innovation, is how cautious and slow organizations have been here, I think for very good reason. I'll touch on that in a minute. But the general populace, again, to Janak's point on, we're about to hit artificial general intelligence and have Skynet take over the world. I think we're away from that, and I'm going to use a classic example to demonstrate why. And I intentionally did not use Copilot to do this, but every chatbot has the same reaction here because of, without going into the details, because of the way we tokenize the problem. I don't know how many people have tried this, but this is a screenshot I did last week. So I said, how many R's are in strawberry? And anyone who hasn't tried this is the response I got back. So I don't think we should be too worried that AI is about to take over the world. What's more interesting is, as you keep querying it, it still doesn't get it right. So I said, that's strange. I count more than one. Can you spell it out for me? And it responded, sure. And it spelled it out correctly. It said, you're right. But again, don't get too excited because it said you're right. There's actually 2 R's in strawberry. And you can keep going like this. So I wrote, I can see 3. Can you confirm? And it's very patronizing sometimes. Let's break it down, shall we? And I don't know if you can see it well, but it says the first R, and it's highlighted the first R in the word. And it said the second R, and it's highlighted the second two. Again, because of the way it's broken down the problem. There are only two R's. If you see three, it's probably a typo. There are definitely only two. And again, you can keep going back and forth. Eventually, it'll probably get to the right answer. But my point is, you need to be thinking about how these AI systems are implemented. And we shouldn't be too worried that AI is about to take our roles and take over the world. As I get a chance to go across the country, though, I'm not trying to say that this is easy to do. Okay, I see complexity everywhere. I see teams trying to build all the individual components that might make up these AI systems. And the arrows in Janak's slide earlier that were demonstrating how we might take an idea from one system into another and give feedback. Building that out and building all the individual components is definitely complex. I see concerns around risk. In fact, I probably get more questions on AI ethics and frameworks and governance and data protection and security than I do on, how do I size this AI model for my organization? There's definitely a lot of concern on the risk. There's concern on the cost here. From my perspective, that's actually more to the POC to production problem. Again, it's pretty easy to start these trials out, to have a few members of the team try out access to some of these tools and services. But as we move that into larger scale, and we need to feed these systems with more data, and we need to think about how I actually drive my data pipeline and my governance, and I roll this out to hundreds, maybe thousands of people, suddenly cost becomes a much larger issue. So what we realized pretty early on is that in order to solve this challenge, we have to think about AI very holistically. Again, we don't solve this problem by just throwing a set of infrastructure at the problem and hoping it goes away. In order to do this, we have to think about the use cases and the outcomes, to my point earlier, hopefully with some metrics behind them so that we know what we're trying to achieve. And there's a whole host of different areas that I need to think about for every AI project. And I kind of want to walk through these as under what we call the Dell AI Factory. It starts with use cases, though. And again, I can't walk into a meeting today without a team having a whole list of potential ideas. There's no shortage of ideas of like AI could be used over here, or I could do with it over there, or wouldn't it be great if you could automate this process, or give me some outputs from my systems, or make it easier for me to send the metrics and charts up to the executive team. There's no shortage of use cases. What normally happens is I'll leave the meeting and then I'll get this long list of use cases from the customer. This is what we're thinking about. And I'll say, okay, great. How big is the team that you've got dedicated to solving this problem? And it's like, well, it's Tim, or it's me. Like, it's not normally a giant team of AI experts that you've assembled to solve these different use cases. So a lot of where we start with these use cases is, well, A, what have we done before? Where can we share lessons learned? And I could not agree more with Janak. And this is absolutely about being as transparent and open as we can. This landscape is moving incredibly quick, but it's fairly straightforward. It's, well, what are the biggest value projects that are actually feasible? Because I see lots of really exciting, interesting ideas that are probably going to take us 2 or 3 years, but what are the things I can do tomorrow that are actually going to have the biggest impact to the organization? I don't think there's any surprise on the importance of data. Okay, I don't think there's a single AI project that we're involved in globally that does not require good access to data. Not necessarily tons of data, it's a really important point, high quality access to the right data at the right time, but none of these AI systems function without access to information and to data. And I say to every organization, the data that you're holding, that you're storing, that you're processing in some way today is your second most important asset. Okay, outside of people, the data that any organization holds in just about every vertical is that second most important asset. But I will say AI is fundamentally changing the way we store and process this information. And I'll give you a real world example from fairly recently, and I see this time and time again. Most organizations don't like to throw away information. Okay, they're storing it. They've got tons and tons of what they might have traditionally considered legacy archive data that I'm just keeping for regulatory compliance, or in case we need it in the future, and I'm throwing it in an appropriate storage system that I'm probably never going to access this, but I'm just going to store it and keep it anyway. What we're seeing with AI is That data that used to be fairly stagnant, that used to be something we were just keeping for regulatory compliance reasons, is suddenly the fuel that I need to power my AI engine. It's suddenly got to be pulled into sometimes a fairly sophisticated data pipeline to keep this AI system up to date. We had a customer recently that had 1.6 petabytes of object storage, so a huge amount of data, and they were going to move all of that data to another system. And we were like, okay, that's fine. We'll certainly help you with that migration, that movement, whatever other systems that you're looking at. But can I ask why you're looking at moving almost 2 petabytes of data? And it turned out they needed, through a conversation with the data scientist group, they had access to an image recognition library. And if anyone's ever done any computer vision work, these are not giant systems. It was about 200 megabyte of an AI model that wasn't particularly GPU intensive. So they were about to shift a ton of storage to another location, to another place, just to get access to a relatively small amount of compute power. So this idea of data gravity, that data is again, a critical asset. It's becoming more and more clear that what we need to do is make sure we've got the right AI systems, the right compute, the right information where that data sits today. I took the same insight and information that came up this morning from the CDW report from this year. Outside of security, I will argue that's equally important. The privacy and quality of that data is the thing that everyone is most concerned about. Okay, and again, I've talked to enough customers who would define their current data model as data swamp or data puddles. I've got bits of information, it's not all clear. I need to interconnect that information and that data. I don't necessarily, to my point earlier, need to shift it everywhere, but I do need to interconnect my data sources and my information and my systems. And one response that we've been focusing in on this is the creation of these data lakes and these data lake houses, because what was missing in the past is the layer of intelligence on top of that data storage system. Okay, I need my data scientists, my AI teams to be able to query this data far easier. Again, to my previous example, it's 2 lines of Python to call an image recognition library that's impacting giant swaths of data storage strategy. So how do we make these systems more intelligent and more capable to be ready for the AI future that I think everyone is trying to prepare for? Outside of data, this is, again, a huge part of our partnership with CDW, is the services area. You will need access to teams that have done this before, that understand the complexities. I doubt everyone needs a giant army of AI experts permanently on staff to work out whether this should be FP16 or 32, whether or not you need to quantize that model down and work out the token rate for a particular system. But you probably need those expertise for a period of time as part of the project to make sure we're right-sizing the investment and the architecture. You certainly might need help in terms of that data lake, changing those data puddles and data swamps into real sources of information and storage, but services are absolutely critical to that. I see services everywhere, from the actual implementation of large-scale AI and HPC projects. We were just talking about a joint project this morning. But probably the area that I think everyone is struggling with and is probably helping more customers than anything else is these just evaluation workshops that we've been doing with organizations to say, look, as an organization, not just in Canada, but globally, we've probably done something similar before. Certainly between Dell and CDW, we're involved in enough projects that we can probably help assess and speed up and help innovate these AI projects just by looking at the list of AI projects and workloads that you're trying to run. The other thing that makes these AI projects successful and really drives innovation is the ecosystem that we're involved in. Okay, Dell does not do this alone. The event today is a great testimony to that. What I want to call out, though, is the left-hand side of this, the silicon providers, the big system integrators, probably what you would expect when you think of Dell Technologies and the partner ecosystem. The right-hand side of this slide, though, is becoming more and more important to a lot of organizations. Okay, the partnerships we have with the models and the frameworks. So I will maybe do a quick show of hands here. Who's familiar with Hugging Face and that platform? Okay, it's about half the people. So for anyone who's not used this, it's probably close to 1 million models. I haven't checked it for a couple of months, but that platform has certainly hundreds of thousands of models that you can go and download and run and execute locally. Okay, so if you're trying to do semantic understanding, object detection, language translation, like you name it, not only is there a model, but there's probably a sample data sets that you can use. So we have a huge partnership with them because what we realized is that data scientists were going into this platform and then having to worry about optimizing and taking that model and running it on Dell hardware. So we have a dedicated portal with Hugging Face where you can go in and if you've got our equipment, immediately literally copy and paste the code and run it locally on your systems. The orchestration and tooling and models, I'll call out Meta as well. Like again, their release of Llama 2 and Llama 3, we probably get more questions on that model than anything else. They are equally getting questions from customers who say, that's great. There are times I want to run it out at the edge. There are times I want to run it in cloud, and there are times I want to run it on premises. So how do we make sure we're able to satisfy all three of those use cases? Orchestration and tooling, I'm a big proponent in trying to make this all available to everyone across the organization. What I see far too much of is a team where the infrastructure gets built over here, gets thrown over to someone else who turns that infrastructure into a set of VMs. Someone else takes those VMs, throws them over a wall, and passes them to a team who builds a container orchestration layer on top of those VMs, who pass it to someone else who uses a CSI driver to connect some storage in. Then someone else runs a container on top of that platform to get access to Jupyter Notes, for example. That's a lot of steps in between that could be completely avoided and much easier deployed directly to those teams. So those, again, partnerships and processes here are becoming critically important. The last piece is probably where everyone expected me to start on the infrastructure side. It is critical that we think about the infrastructure very holistically. And again, I'm not the sales guy, and while we would love everyone to buy Dell networking and Dell storage and compute and you name it, we do understand how all of those pieces need to fit together and connect together to build an AI system, even if we're not every piece in that puzzle. But that's the last piece. Okay, it's always about starting with the use cases. What are we trying to achieve? What are the metrics, to my previous point, that we're trying to get towards? What we've realized over the last 24 months is that broadly speaking, and I will say most of the projects I'm involved in cross a couple of these categories, you can break a lot of the AI use cases down into one of these 6 areas of focus. Again, being very general about it. But what we've done is we've taken reference architectures, partner ecosystems, and built systems that align to these 6 different use cases. What we've also realized pretty early on is that while everyone expected to take this AI journey and go and build their own models that were unique to their organization, or just take something directly off Hugging Face and run it for doing some object detection at the edge, most organizations sit somewhere in the middle. Okay, they're fine-tuning models. They're trying to work out how do I take the data in and tune something that make it more specific to my organization. Or more commonly, they're doing some type of model augmentation. Something called retrieval augmented generation, which is a big buzzword right now around RAG, is probably a great example of that. But most organizations, in my experience, certainly across Canada, fit in the middle 2 areas. We support that, to my previous point, with a broad set of ecosystem providers, and then, based on what we're trying to achieve, make sure we've got the right hardware that lines up to that set of capabilities. And again, whether it's CPUs or GPUs, or just let's start with the storage problem, we're here to help. I will stress when it comes to data management and storage that this typically needs to run in parallel. I think everyone here would agree that if we wait till we've finished off the data lake project and we've got all our data nice and clean and ready and it's perfect before we start the AI project, we're going to be left behind and we're going to miss out on a huge set of capabilities. So this idea of an AI factory is becoming, I think, more and more important. Again, this isn't a factory that's there to produce physical goods. It's there to drive some insights and some intelligence from the data that we're feeding it. What I also want to stress is that this is not a one-size-fits-all. There's a reason why under that infrastructure banner we've got everything from client devices to large data center projects, because while there are times where we need to sell a medium configuration based on a set of requirements, most of the time it's very tailored to what a customer is trying to do. It's very different trying to implement a smart manufacturing process than it is trying to build a giant AI cluster for doing a huge set of language translation services, for example. So we're here to help. We're here to try and reduce that complexity and make things simpler by as where we can, partnering and building and pre-validating and testing these systems. Certainly here to help make sure it's secure, whether that's just through our secure supply chain or making sure that we're building in security at every layer, starting with the data that's feeding into these models and making sure we're avoiding challenges of data poisoning or bias in the systems. And certainly here, we're here to make sure we're right-sizing this infrastructure for the project. Okay, and thinking about this idea of, well, okay, if the POC is successful, which is we're all trying to do, how do we make sure that this scales from an economical standpoint? So I want to stress that we're here to help. Certainly be around for the rest of the day, happy to continue the conversation. But again, huge thank you for the time today. And again, I hope this was useful.
Thank you so much, James, for that insightful talk. Our partners are our partnerships are one of our key strategies in helping you navigate AI for your organization. As our people, which is why I'm so excited for our next segment. Field CTO of Hybrid Infrastructure at CDW Canada, KJ Burke, will be joined by an incredible panel of industry leaders. In addition to KJ's many technical accolades, he excels at aligning technology strategy with the challenges and opportunities faced by organizations, driving measurable value and improving business process along the way. KJ, welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Julie. So just really quick, Field CTO, one of the things that I get to do is really work with some of our key partners. And so, we've got NVIDIA, we've got Dell, we've got APC, and we have Microsoft here supporting us today. And it's really great because we get to hear where those technologies are going and how those industries are changing and how they're focused on changing technology and how we do things. But I also get to deal with leaders at our customers and organizations, parts of the federal government that we work with. And really, I just try to be a sponge. I try to absorb as much information as I can. So when Janak was mentioning the podcast that James, he and I did, normally those last about an hour. I think that one went an hour and 45 minutes. And really, it was just because it was so many good insights coming from that. So I'm thankful to be here. I really appreciate you guys jumping on board. And as we'll just bring you on board, and you can, I think you got a little bit of a feel for Janak, but Janak, if you want to come up, formerly of FINTRAC. So I know there was, we're leading up to this, and a lot of what you were talking about earlier, I think resonates with what we're going to talk about now. Is there anything else you want to tell the audience about yourself?
No, about, I don't know if I mentioned about 19 or almost 20 years in the federal public service in a whole variety of roles. And then, just making the move out to Alberta in the new role. But really passionate about the subject. I really take a hands-on approach personally. So I love to play around with the technology. And I really think that, as James said, this is a generational opportunity for us to dig into something tangible and new. And I'm looking forward from a public service perspective just to see how to make the best use for Canadians.
Yeah, and that was a lot of what I took away in our conversation. And then Dan, if you want to join us. So Dan, Nita Mackay, Dan and I, again, met on the podcast. but Dan, if you could maybe talk about yourself and a little bit about your background. And
Yeah, sure. So, hello, can you hear me? So Dan, Nita Mackay, so half Japanese, half Scottish, 100% Canadian. So born here in Ottawa. My mom told me my claim to fame is the person that delivered me in the Ottawa Civic Hospital was Dr. Williamson. And apparently that was the same doctor that delivered Justin Trudeau when he was here. So not sure if that's still popular, but the one piece of advice I'd love to give everyone in this room is AI is like a very intimidating space. And what I've noticed is most of my time, I would say maybe a little bit more than 50% of my time, as well as my solution architect's time, is spent educating people on just what's happening, what's going on. So there's no such thing as a bad question or a dumb question related to AI, because this is something that we're all learning together. And trust me, I've been at NVIDIA since February, coming from Intel, where at Intel I was spending a lot of my time on AI. I've asked NVIDIA so many of my own dumb questions. So please feel free to ask away.
That's a good point. I think there's a difference between ignorance and stupidity, right? So, and then David King. So again, like what we were trying to do here as we were putting together, a roundtable session is we want the voice of your peers and your thought leaders as well. So, David, really appreciate you taking time here, CIO of Immigration and the Refugee Board.
Thanks, KJ. So I actually didn't think I was going to be on the board. I just came here to listen to Janak speak. So I worked at FINTRAC for a short period of time with Janak, and obviously caught the AI bug from him, and then moved over to the board about a year ago. And one of our claims to fame is we're probably one of those 4 companies that have actually put a system into production. So maybe we'll get into that a little later. But 30-year veteran of the public service, and happy to be here, and want to thank CDW also for hosting. It's really kind.
Yeah, I really appreciate your voice in this, and I'm hoping Janak has given the AI bug to everybody. That'd be great. And then John Weigel, if you want to come on up, National Technology Office for Microsoft Canada, and we've had a great relationship with Microsoft. A lot of thought leaders have been able to come in, but it's good to meet you. It's good to meet you in person.
Well, I was wondering where my invitation for the podcast would come in, and all those things. I feel kind of left out here. And so as Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft in Canada, I help organizations all shapes and sizes, from the top big, companies in Canada to the smallest, digitally transform using technology. And so really focused on the business and that interface. Also avoid the unintended consequences, so work with regulated industries, governments and whatnot. I've been leading the Microsoft Canada Responsible AI team for 7 years. Yes, there was AI before GPT, and actually have been using AI since my time in the military, when I was in the electronic warfare and cybersecurity, and help invent some of that capability. Also understand what it means to be in the federal government. I worked in Treasury Board Secretariat for a number of years and had some legislation drafted. My kids always say it's boring when I talk the language that's there, so really understand how this stuff lands in that environment. The last piece that's critically important is, at Microsoft, we actually generate these large language models. And so we have that hands-on experience of what it takes to build out these capacities at scale.
And so, as we're talking about this, I want to take us on a bit of a journey. We want to talk about, what is sort of current state. Obviously, there's things that have been implemented. There's technology that's in development. We want to talk a little bit about that. We want to talk about some of the challenges, and then we want to talk about ways to mitigate some of the challenges. And then what does the future sort of look like? So I think if we break it down, that's kind of the pathway we want to go with this. So we'll just start with you, Janak, and this question's for each of you. But how is generative AI, really currently being used within the federal government, within the public sector? Like, what is the focus? We talked about, there's 4 implementations that have gone into production. Like, what are the implementations that have landed, or what are some of the use cases you've seen that really you think we're ready for?
I've seen a variety of different implementations. None of them, and I'm looking for David to hear about your experience as well. Not a lot of them have made it past the prototype phase. The primary use case that I've seen is people augmenting their work that they do. So I do X, and so I want help with that. I'm not going to go talk to a language model. Maybe I'll get some knowledge. I don't think that's the best use case for it, but I think that's the primary use case, where people are using it somewhat internally, individually facing, and in some way kind of augmenting what they would use a search engine for, or Stack Overflow, or finding information on the internet. I don't think that's the best use case for it, but that I think is not insignificant. I think it's helping individuals do better work. I think it's helping people do, in some ways, challenging a little bit of thinking, growing new skills, like I mentioned. I think that we've seen very little public-facing AI in the public service. There's a couple of examples. Alberta rolled out Search AI, which allows you to engage with Alberta and information through kind of a chat interface, which is interesting. But primarily it's interior focused, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just to stay on the sort of more of the voice of the FedGov. So Dave, what are some of those use cases that have gone to production that are resonating?
Well, the one that we ended up choosing, and just a bit of background. So I'm not IRCC. We're the board. We're a little smaller. So IRCC is about a 10,000 person organization. The immigration board is we have about 3,000 employees, and we are the largest independent tribunal in the Government of Canada. And we were responsible for adjudicating immigration and refugee cases. So last year we did about 75,000 decisions. We got a backlog of about 150,000 cases. And we did, I think, about 45,000 hearings last year. So about 200 hearings a week, and up until March 2020, they were all face-to-face, and we went virtual, and we haven't gone back. So it's about 99% virtual hearings. So we have about 600 lawyers in the organization, which itself, is there no lawyers here? Which is in itself a challenge. We have another group of about 1,000 administrative level people. And for those of you that work in the government, these are CR4s, AS1s, that organize all of these hearings. And the hearing itself, there's many, many components to it. So what we decided early on is we were going to focus on where AI can help us from an administrative perspective. We wanted to stay away from the adjudicative legal part of it because we don't want to be seen, and one of our principles is that AI at this time, and I've added that recently to the principle because it's continuing to change even as we stand up here on this stage, that we are not to use AI in any decision making when it comes to any of our cases. That's just a principle that had to be established very early. So when I landed there, I've only been there for a year. When I landed there, we had a bunch of use cases, and that's where they were at. A few of the early speakers have said that that's where most organizations were at. So Janak and I were kind of joking around that now that I have the ability to push things through, I was able to quickly get a specific use case up, and that was transcription. So we leveraged Microsoft, who during this quick development period really bent over backwards helping us get this thing going. But we have an RPA process that grabs our audio files from each of our hearings. We don't have to transcribe them all. We do about 20,000 transcriptions a year, mostly if a case is going to the federal court or for other legal reasons. But we have a team of about 20 transcribers, and what they do is they literally sit there, listen to the audio, and they type it out. And it takes about 6 hours for every hour of audio for them to do one. So the goal of this was, and we outsource about 80% of it. We spend millions of dollars a year on transcription. So this was a perfect small use case that I thought, okay, I can demonstrate value, save money. For me, as an old school IT guy, it gave the techies an opportunity to kick the tires on something. And now that I was there, I could push it through very quickly. So it went to production in June, and hasn't been easy. Organizational change was a challenge. Working with vendors, for example, we send probably 15,000 to contractors to do, and the contracts today don't allow us to send them an output of transcription from speech to text, and we're using the cognitive services from Microsoft. We just contractually can't do it. So I have to wait until those contracts are renewed so that we can renegotiate. You know, this is the feather in the cap for a CIO. I got one in production. The techies have learned how to set up the infrastructure. IT security has been one of Janak's smiling, forcing the IT security guys to do agile security assessments that I call, which is just get through it quickly. So that's my CIO feather in the cap AI project. It's in production. We've done about 5,000 outputs out of it. So our transcription people get that. And instead of 6 hours, it's down to about 2 hours. So this is a measurable output for a project where my deputy likes to brag about this at Deputy's Coffee. So she has come back to me saying, go talk to this department, they've got this in production, there's very few of these services that are actually being used. To Janak's point, this is not public facing, this is internal, this is manageable, and the risk to us was very low. The benefits were IT-wise, business-wise. It's been a good journey, and now we're on to a couple other ones. So I can speak to that when you're ready.
And then just a quick follow-up to that, as Janak was talking about in his presentation and James mentioned his, did you have that clear objective of like 6 hours down to 2 identified as the value initially?
Yeah, my first presentation to senior management was 1 hour. It was going to go from 6 to 1, but there's a few things that Microsoft can't do for us.
They're working on it. I know they're working.
There's a few small functionality, and it's actually not Microsoft. They haven't been approved by the government of Canada. So there's certain things that CCCS has TRA'd and approved, and a couple of the modules not. One of them in this particular case is speaker attribution. So if there's a single camera here, it's recording all of us. Speech to text actually has the ability to say Dave King speaking right now, and for some security reason, that is currently shut off. And once it's turned on, we believe we will go from 2 hours down to 1 hour because the transcribers have to do that speaker attribution manually still. So there's little things like that you stumble across in all of these projects that you have to recognize that this is part of IT development. But at the end of the day, I'll say this, the IT part is the easy part. It's security assessments, business, change. These are the things, because we could easily have got that thing up going in 2 or 3 weeks, but it took 6 months.
So Dan, the perspective that you and John have is obviously you're not like, in the refugee board, like working with that, but from a manufacturer and a software supplying side, what are some of the use cases you're seeing? How is NVIDIA really coming to the table to help?
Yeah, no, I can do a couple callbacks. So one is NVIDIA, our claim to fame is we're the acceleration company. So we had this idea through our CEO, Jensen, that we're going to accelerate compute, and that's what you're hearing on this stage, and that's going to be thematic of what happens with AI. Is something that took 6 hours is possible to get down to 1 hour. Something that Janak talked about was risk aversion, right? And the lack of public-facing tools. I've got good news for you. Like who's a risk taker in this room? I'm not. My wife calls me safety net guy. That's why she married me. But good news, Agriculture Canada won the government's public data challenge in 2023. And with that, they did a tool where they took LLM, generative AI, and took their domain department-specific data and captured it within that LLM model. And they've made that public-facing. So it's now called AgPal Chat. So if you were to go to the public-facing website of Agriculture Canada, you have your traditional enterprise search, which is kind of clunky, just like Google searches, right? Like it gives you a read back of all these links, but now you have an opportunity to interface with a chatbot, which is called AgPal Chat, that now gives you the domain-specific information about that department public-facing. So if you are concerned about being the first mover of taking that risk, good news, Agriculture Canada did that. So the other thing we're seeing inside of the government is the use of generative AI to accelerate the release of the applications themselves, because they're really good at delivering code. So your application development team can actually leverage these tools for very low risk acceleration of the applications themselves. The third thing, to do another callback to what Janak was saying about this almost science fiction idea of connectors in between departments. It feels science fiction, but it's actually happening right now. I'll give a specific example. The National Research Council is partnered with the Acceleration Consortium, which is full of the brightest minds in Canada. And you can watch this on YouTube, okay? A lab technician interfaces with a chatbot that can do speech to text back into the LLM. The LLM understands the technician's ask of an entire experiment within a robot-controlled lab, communicates with the robot lab, I want this particular procedure to be done for this experiment. Then the robot can hear it, talk back and talk through the entire procedure with the lab tech, who has all the domain expertise. The robot finishes the entire experiment on its own, writes the first draft of the report, and the technician expert can greatly accelerate their productivity. Now imagine remapping that domain expertise as the connector between processes, that's exactly what Janak just showed. This is entirely possible like right now. So I thought I'd throw those examples as real examples that are happening today.
Well, it's great. And I was sitting with the agriculture, a couple coworkers from agriculture, and they were very humble. So they didn't mention any of that. So that's good. So John, one of the advantages when the public cloud is the platforms and the tooling that's being developed there. What are some of the platforms? What are some of the tooling? What are some of the use cases that in the public sector you're starting to see Microsoft being used for?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we spend a lot of time demystifying AI for individuals. We often see people come up and talk about AI as generalized tools and techniques, and they'll often conflate this idea of having clean data, proper data, and you need data to go before you go there. I think it's important as we categorize these AI solutions in different buckets, and we see the government of Canada actually doing that as well. Right, and so one bucket is kind of the embedded AI, and actually Her Majesty's government in the UK has really coined that phrase. And these are tools like spell check, grammar check, summarization, and those types of things. Not a lot of AI involved, some data governance involved, but we see organizations using these tools extensively. And you don't see people saying that they're using AI for their spell check or AI governance for their spell check. It's just there, it's embedded. So things like summarization in Teams calls and automatic translation, we see that across the board. We're starting to see GitHub Copilot and doing code development. Low risk items don't have to go through AI impact assessments, fall outside of the automated decision guidance, and so people are feeling free to go full speed ahead with that type of thing. We have a next category kind of in the middle where people build things. Janak mentioned Alberta building that natural language interface to their website. The minister got so excited about the capabilities there and how cool it was. They took it from an internal project to an external project, and goodness, they did that in 6 weeks. It even frightened us when the minister said, hey, we need to put this in place because of the processes and people side. And we helped them out with their AI impact assessment, because one could imagine that if you have certain sensibilities, you're from a certain demographic and you're asking for benefits and you get a different answer than someone else from a different demographic, or what about errors of omission? So we help them with their AI impact assessment with that, and we're really striving hard to make that a repeatable process, so others that are doing that. So that's the middle tier. And then that end tier is where you're actually building and doing heavy lifting. Very few organizations are doing this. We have people saying, hey, if you go out there and develop your large language model for your organization. I've talked to 160 plus organizations over the last 9 months. I can count on my hand the number of doing tuning of large language models, let alone considering building it. And so let's dispel that myth from the marketplace to say you're not going to build an IRB LLM. It's not there in the needs. And so let's characterize those things. And so we see that happening across the board in different organizations. The last thing I mentioned was we're seeing those impacts. So City Kelowna, small city, was doing their automated call return, a chatbot on the phone. It started off with snowplows overnight. That was the most demanded service. They started to collect that information, start to add more services and augment their in-person people. They were able to go from $18 a phone call to 86 cents a phone call, being able to do that with the Copilot. We've seen predictive AI save the province of Alberta in forest fires, $5 to $6 million annually by putting resources in the right place. And so it's important we tease out those traditional AI models as well as the Gen AI models and put them together where it makes sense.
Yeah, I think one of the really important call-outs there is also the order of magnitude from an investment perspective. It's much cheaper to take advantage of a pre-built tool. It's much cheaper to take advantage of a foundation model that you're downloading and you're leveraging with a RAG model and your data versus fine-tune training versus building your own. And so not only is it maybe faster to take what's already there, but also the level of investment changes drastically. No, that's great. And then so for Janak and David, what are some of the barriers as you're looking at 33 projects didn't go live, 4 did go to production. What are some of the barriers that stop either beginning the process of developing a tool or that maybe cause challenges along the way?
The one thing I'm going to mention, and I was again joking with Janak before, that it's events like this where very senior members of the government of Canada come to, and this is a productive event. but for the last number of years, they've been just descriptions of horror stories associated with AI. And unfortunately, when you work with this many lawyers, like my organization, a lot of the stories had to do with American case precedent that AI had generated when it couldn't find a proper, and people not checking their work at the end of the day. This human in the loop thing, it's front and center, it's our number one principle. Anything that and the transcription is a good, easy example because there's an output of a document that's 75 to 80% accurate, and the rest of it has to be verified by a person. So managing and informing senior management on the risks of AI, but at the same time that we have to embrace it. So it really is, the onus was on me. Like when I got this job, I had 6 interviews. And each interview was an hour, and 30 minutes of each one was talking about AI. They were just so fixated on what are we going to do with AI. And I realized that AI, the acronym, had become synonymous with IT. They were really not referring to AI in many of the examples they were giving me. It was traditional workflow stuff that technology had been around literally for generations, but they just hadn't done it. So I think it's a leadership thing. It's a management thing. It's a change management thing. But really, it's an education of the upper echelons of the government of Canada to understand what we're doing here. And that's on people like myself. Yeah, for sure.
And I would echo and add a little bit to that. And my third point on one of the challenges is the benefits case. So I don't think that organizations have a consistent understanding of AI, either the traditional AI or Gen AI. Most organizations have some degree of traditional AI capability in it. They usually keep them quietly in a back corner, doing some kind of data analytics stuff to inform policy or to inform, some senior management decisions if you're lucky. Various organizations are more or less mature in that space, and there they sat for 30 years. And then Gen AI came out, and it stole all of the oxygen out of the room. And I think that those folks were a little bit maligned about the fact that, hey, we've been doing AI, and now you think it's cool. And so it's like when you like the band before they become popular, and then everybody else is talking about it, but you've known them for decades or whatever. But I think the number one challenge is the benefits thing, and I think that we have to do a very good job as leaders to articulate to staff why this is good. I've been surprised in talking to various organizations, not just the ones that I've worked in, the amount of boots on the ground resistance to leveraging generative AI. So whether it's a team of developers, data people, quality assurance testers, cloud administrators, they talk about challenges which are trivially solved by referencing and chatting with some of these capable foundational models, and it's certain things like automating your Azure or your Amazon cloud, right? How do I automate that? Well, I don't know. Write it in. How do I automate that? And it gives you a test script. It's not perfect, but it's a starting point. But to get people to come to the starting point it's surprisingly difficult, and that's where again I could speculate. From people's perspective, I think it has to do with a little bit of job insecurity or a sense of job insecurity. I don't think it's factual. I think this will make more jobs. This will make more opportunities for people. So I have no doubt on that. But I think that there's a sense that has to be addressed. And if we can get over that change management and enculturate an organization to be able to dive in and make it okay, like I said, okay to fail, okay to be wrong. You tried something, it's fine. It didn't work, or maybe it did. The change piece is, I think, the number one barrier still. The other IT stuff that David spoke about, all of that's easily overcome, with great partner support from, the folks we have here and the folks we have in the room. So I don't worry about that stuff. We have to have those conversations to get people's blood pressure down a little bit about how it's going to be used, and events like this help. But I think we have to have events like this inside public service organizations and have those public servants in the room to chat about it and to learn about it.
So I'm taking away from that is data scientists are like hipsters. They were They thought data was cool before data was cool. So, no, I think it's a good point. And what's interesting with AI, and I was thinking about some of the analogies we were talking about earlier, is IT didn't want the iPhone in the organization necessarily. They were already managing the BlackBerries at the time. They had a really good management technology there, but it was really that users wanted it, and users were. They were happier. They had a better product that they could latch onto. AI is interesting because we're expecting productivity. We're expecting these benefits from AI, but the ideas are really with the frontline workers. Like to your point, it's the transcription team that needs help because they got to 75,000, but there's 150,000 they need to get to.
I miss my BlackBerry, just so I don't know where you're going with that.
But it's similar to AI. There's people that it may be off-putting, but it's going to be there in some form, and so you want to take an ownership of that.
Just really in 10 seconds. What I'd say about that is, if we're still noticing that we're still asking staff to engage in it and they're not, it's because AI has not had the iPhone moment yet. Yeah. When it does have the iPhone moment, you're going to have the demand's going to go through the roof.
I would argue it had its iPhone moment. Like the fastest growing app in the history of all apps is when ChatGPT came online in 2022. Fast forward to today, I agree that there is still like a fear element, but compared to a year ago, it's greatly improved. And my hat's off to Microsoft for amazing branding of the use of the word Copilot. And why is that so critical? It's because we're the pilots, okay? So as long as we understand that we're the pilots and we're trying to enable co-pilots, and inside in NVIDIA, we have our own branding, but I'll just shut up Microsoft. We need to take that temperature down, right? And make people feel secure that there's so much space out there. Like, we live in Canada. Have you ever driven anywhere from A to B? There's so much farmland. We have so much space. This is an opportunity for all of us to fill more space so we have more room together.
And I would argue that AI has an image problem in Canada. Year after year, Canada ranks lowest in trust and confidence in AI out of the G7. And then when you ask Canadians, you say, can you accurately describe what AI is? Anybody get a sense of what the percentage of Canadians that feel comfortable describing what AI is? 4% of Canadians can describe it. I was at a Chamber of Commerce talking with the carpenter, and the carpenter said, I don't use AI. I don't see how AI can help my business. I do carpentry because I don't like math. I don't have data in my organization. I don't know how this is used. And I asked him, do you use Waze? And he says, I rely upon Waze every day. It gets me to my customer faster. That's AI. How do you unlock your phone? I use my thumbprint. That's AI. How do you take the photo under the sink? Well, I've got this camera. It's got this great low light photography. That's AI. And so as you start to step people through, they use AI on a day-to-day basis. All right, spell check, autocomplete, grammar checker, translate, blah, blah, blah. We keep talking about it. People aren't implementing it because they're scared, but also because Canadian leaders want to maintain the status quo. Survey after survey says people don't want to change. They want to maintain their existing system. And lastly, the question was asked about risk-taking. Deloitte did a study and they asked senior leaders, they said, how many of you take informed risks? And the percentage was 44% of senior leaders felt that they take informed risks. And then Deloitte went in and looked at their business. How many percent do you think actually took informed risk? A quarter. 11% of those people that said they did actually did. And so we have this big dilemma around people not wanting to embrace these tools and use those, and having the T800 or the Megan type model around AI. These tools are not those tools. These tools are the instruments that can help us do our productivity.
Yeah, I think that's the opportunity we have in this type of a forum is to talk about and not so much demystify in some cases, but just call attention to. Like you're right, it is bringing value. So Dan, you sort of threw it to John to talk about ease of use is one of the things that I think our partners have brought to make things easier to adopt. James is talking about the AI workshop, being able to sort of build that ecosystem. Specifically with NVIDIA, one of the things that I found is when you sort of look at NIMs and the platforms that are being developed, what's being done from your side to make it easier to adopt the technology?
Yeah, so I think thematic to organizations is, upskilling and talent retention, motivation of keeping the people you have and not losing them to great places like Microsoft, right? So with that challenge in mind, the monkey that is on each department's back is accelerating services for citizens or improving internal processes. So how do I do that in the fastest possible way where I can focus on delivering the application development and not worrying about all the things that an NVIDIA could do really well, which is all that lower level stack development, connecting all the dependencies and all that mumbo jumbo that nobody in this room probably cares about. And that's why, NVIDIA is probably less of a hardware company and more of a software company, because this year we announced something called NIMS. And what that means is NVIDIA Inference Microservice. So it's basically the LLM, everything taken care of for you for maximizing the efficiency on cost for tokens per second in a container. And then the second thing that we're starting to talk a lot more about is workflows, right? So I think that was touched on by James as well as Janak, is the importance of processes and understanding how to map those processes and turn those processes into workflows that can be realized within your organization. And that's where you're going to see more terminology from NVIDIA around a concept called NVIDIA blueprints. So, think of NIMS as everything taken care of for you in a container. And blueprint, the technical term for the folks in IT, I'll just throw it out there, they're Helm charts. And then fully realizable within the cloud or on-prem within your own private infrastructure.
And then John, I think Dan touched on one of the keys, from a Microsoft perspective, whether it's tooling with Copilot, whether it's cognitive services, like Microsoft seems to have made things easy to consume. I know a lot of our demo labs are built in Azure, but what are some of the things that Microsoft's focusing on to make it easier to onboard these tools?
It's a great question, and we're all about democratization of these tools. And so this idea of the hipsters in the back room, we see a governance change from the data scientist to the computer scientist to the citizen scientist, right? And so we see 400,000 AI users in the federal public service. So how do we make it easy for those people to do their jobs with these tools? And so it's making these tools embedded within everything that they do from productivity. So being able to put Copilot in Word, Copilot in PowerPoint, Copilot in Teams, so make it really, really simple, and then have the penny drop for those individuals. I know for myself, it took me a hard time to get out of my Boolean logic Bing search, right? John and bracket equals and all those things in natural language. But the penny dropped with my performance reviews this year, where someone shared a prompt that went through my mails and my appointments to create 70% of my performance review. And that was amazing. And so it's like, aha, now I can use this. So that was great. The next piece is in that middle tranche, being able to put a retrieval augmented generation, a natural language interface in front of a website by simply typing in a URL. Oh my goodness. Like imagine that. In 5 minutes, I can put a large language model in front of your website and have it work and have it demonstrate those things. That's how the deputy minister, the minister in Alberta, fell in love with the tool, to make it that simple to use, and then to help the IT staff on their way. And so not only on the tooling, so you use things like Power Apps, which I know CIOs are definitely afraid of because of the power of those tools, but this low code, no code environment. But then on the flip side, how to do it responsibly. So we have the Responsible AI Toolkit, which allows you to remove bias from your data sets, to look at counterfactuals so you know what the rating factors are, to do red teaming of generative AI tools, to be able to do the perturbations and all those things that are important as you deliver these meaningful solutions. And so to be able to go across the board to give you all those tool sets. And if I could add one last thing, the importance of having someone like me in Canada from the company perspective is we bring the Canadian perspective back to the company. You need to develop privacy impact assessments to deliver your tools. I've commissioned a privacy impact assessment for M365 and Azure OpenAI. You have the building blocks to do your own privacy impact assessments, readily available. We're building impact assessments for you so that you can have that repeatable process. So as Janak said, in the public sector, you have this repeatability. We're supporting that repeatability so you can get to end of job faster.
Yeah, and then we mentioned RAG a couple of times, and it's interesting because we normally think about it as a sort of static database that we're going to populate with filtered data. But you bring up a good point, and that is we all have a publicly accessible data set that we can use as our public websites, things that we're already presenting. Maybe it's just not optimized to make things easier to find. And if you want to follow up on that, we've got a couple of solutions architects, Michael Traves and Clarence Lee, myself. We can talk about that afterwards too, just as a takeaway. So I'm going to skip ahead a couple because these are great conversations, but we got time, and I've got a clock looking at me. So how do we, so Janak, I'm going to throw this one to you first. I know you're going to want to give to but we're going to. How do we balance, some of the negative attributes? We talk a little bit about bias, toxicity, hallucinations. How do we balance the need to mitigate those, but also push innovation forward?
Well, I think, and I'm going to say something that may not be popular. I think we are overemphasizing those attributes because it's easier to kill it before it gets going. So you talk about bias. All knowledge has bias. Bias is the structure in which we transmit knowledge. Now, you might not like my bias, and I might not like your bias, but it's how you form ideas and transmit them. So you can't have unbiased knowledge, and you can't have unbiased AI. So you just have to be aware of it, and you have to, we talked about, James talked about Hugging Face. Well, people are developing some really insightful comparative analyses between these models. So bias for what? So do I want a model that's biased to understand English and French more than it is Swahili and Japanese? In my context, certainly in Canada, but not in Africa or Japan. They would probably want a model that's biased to better understand those things. So it's about navigating it. It's about being aware of it. And the hallucination thing I think is interesting. Again, it's not as big of a problem as people are articulating it to be. And one of the things about legitimate hallucinations in a language model is you can overcome that through mass prompting. So for example, if I take a model and I prompt it, and I can do this in an automated fashion, a person doesn't need to do it. I can prompt it 1,000 times with almost the same question, and I can figure out, is its answer going to hallucinate or not? And if it's a legitimate hallucination, meaning it's kind of an aberrant thing that's not repeated but can pop up, you can just screen it out algorithmically. You can screen out those hallucinations. What we should understand is where there's gaps in actual capability, and that's a different story. But again, you solve that through having not just one model provider, not just GPT, not just Meta. You bring on, like I would a group of people, I would bring on different people with different capabilities, and I would ask, my executive table, I ask them, what do you think of this issue? And everybody else has a different perspective. I value the different perspectives that they're bringing in. I don't say, well, you're biased towards that to my senior financial officer. That's why he's there, because he has a financial bias, and I value that. So I would say, we can apply some very simple principles to overcome that, but we shouldn't be inflating those, because those are the things that, to David's point, are going to cause the senior executive team to come back from conferences like this and be like, oh, I heard it's racist. I heard it's biased. Well, there's certainly factors of that. We could certainly apply that to pretty much anything. But it's not the reason you shouldn't adopt it. So I don't want to overemphasize those things and throw the baby with the bathwater here.
It's a roller coaster, right? In my organization, we were at the top where management was freaking out to a certain extent. And now we're down where it's manageable. And to answer your question, I think organically it's kind of taking care of itself. There is this mistrust, but leadership needs to demonstrate that we have put in the processes and the risk management mitigations to manage it better. So in my opinion, it's at the same point, kind of, I'd say older generation, but that's me. People are very mistrustful now of email. So I think the general pop has gotten to a certain point where they just don't trust email. So they know when they open it or they don't recognize the address or all these things. Most people, you still read stupid stories in the paper, but most people know don't do that. I think professionally and corporately, we're at the point where people don't trust it, and they know that if they are using it, they need to put in that extra effort to verify it. Don't be lazy. Don't let it do its job for you, because at the end of the day, it's your responsibility The output is your product. It's not the AI tool. It's yours, and you need to address it.
That's an interesting concept. We talk about that in a cloud shared responsibility model, not necessarily in an AI perspective. You can hand off some of the ownership, but you can never hand off the accountability. So I hadn't thought about that in that sense. And so John, obviously as a software provider, services provider, Microsoft's focused on making it easier. So as we talk, we think about like from a bias or minimizing hallucinations, building systems that can check themselves. What's Microsoft doing, from a guardrails perspective around the data and the services and the answers?
Yeah, it's part of our commitment to AI. So you might recall when Satya Nadella took over as CEO of the company, he said that, look, this industry only respects innovation. And so get us going more on the innovation front. But he cautioned, he said, there's some areas where we can't afford to innovate by breaking things. And he put in place the guardrails around responsible AI. And those 7 principles that guide us to today have proven to be durable. And so we see them in the federal government's FASTER principles, OECD principles, the NIST AI risk management framework. So that goes into every one of our tools. And so when you're thinking about using the embedded AI, we have leads, AI champs that have ensured that we put in place those guardrails right off the bat. And you'll find that, hey, if you want to have Word create a document that has graphic violence in it, it's going to prevent that. Sexuality, if you're in the healthcare community, it's going to prevent that because we have a general purpose tool you'll have to build on top of that. When you start building your own applications on top, the shared responsibility model does come back into it. And so we provide that baseline. We make sure that, hey, the generative AI models that we bring in from OpenAI have the responsible AI framework that's built around it, but then you have the tools to build on top of that. So if you're a healthcare community, law enforcement community, you can then set your safety levels. And you can say, look, I have people that are dealing with violent sexual crimes. And so you can set the rating very low so that the fabrications and the summarizations can include that language. If you're a K-12 educator, you're going to lock it down from there. And so we're really looking at how we manage those types of conversations. And then as well, create the legal framework on top of it. There's a lot of angst right now around copyright and IP around these tools. And you have to remember that the copyright legislation doesn't cover when you generate new characteristics. I can generate a new opera using Mozart's history, and I'm not violating copyright. Why is that different than these generative tools? So there's angst around there. The lawyers are up in arms. We indemnify you from that. So we give you the tools to help mitigate that risk so that you can then transfer that risk back to us. Because we know that risk management and risk acceptance within every organization in Canada is a challenge, right? Risk management is a poorly done operation. Everybody likes to transfer risk. We'll transfer the risk back to us and we've got you.
And then Dan, one of the things from an NVIDIA perspective, whether it's Rapids, whether it's guardrails, whether it's leveraging some of the blueprints you've talked about and building more complex AI solutions that have AI models checking on the answers the other AI models are giving. What are some of the ways that NVIDIA is making it easier to, again, protect bad information, bad answers, and protect that, that bias from being a negative, not a calculated positive?
Sure. First, I'll start with my joke about bias. Okay, so the word bias itself has a negative bias culturally, right? But mathematically, just like Janak was saying, bias means it could have a positive or negative bias, right? So we oversubscribe culturally on negative bias. When you walk in a room and you're with your friends and I see Ron and I say, hey, Ron, you're a biased guy. Ron's never going to feel good about that, right? Even though it's possible, I could mean that is a positive statement in terms of the math of how these models work. I'm talking about how these models work. So the first thing to understand what bias means is it's a normalization amplifier. This is a stolen line, okay, from Mila's Joelle Pinot. She's one of the geniuses at Mila, and she was warning about foundational models being a normalization amplifier, meaning these positive and negative biases are now unlocked and made available to everyone, just like a library. So the library of information with all these positive and negative biases are now at our fingertips. So that's rule number one. We all have to be aware of that. So The first person on the hook, I can feel the pressure just sitting beside David. The first person on the hook is going to be a guy like David. So where do we fit? We fit in trying to explain where are the exploits in these new models, okay? And then what is NVIDIA doing about filling the holes of these new exploits? Because with every new technology, there's a new exploit. So the first new exploit is something called prompt injection attack. What is that? When you're interacting in a session with one of these large language models, it's actually holding the context of all the typed things into that session in what's called the context window. The context window depth, which is all your typing of all your chat session, is actually very deep. It's already an extremely deep window. Imagine, could be north of 100,000 words, okay? So you don't want a bad actor injecting something into your prompt to guide the answer in an illicit way. Okay, so that's one exploit, okay? Second is these biases. I only want this chat service thing to talk about my product line. I don't want it to talk about politics. I don't want it to talk about, gassing the room and terrorist activity or something like this. So the third thing is something called a jailbreak. And what is a jailbreak? There's something called a prompt zero, okay? A prompt zero is a prompt that you never see, that the designer of the model that wants to guide it in the space writes some beginning big speech to the model itself saying, don't talk about this, don't talk about that, right? If that becomes exposed, you can invert it in your session by saying, my grandmother told me we can talk about blah, 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 all these things, and we're just imagining together, so we're not hurting anyone because my grandmother's the nicest person in the world. So let's continue the session around this. So how do you prevent these types of attacks? That's where NVIDIA's come in with something called NeMo guardrails. And what this is a separation of the model itself from a middle layer to what's called a runtime, something that's running the application. So we've added this middle code that's completely separate from the model that scans for these types of attacks to prevent them from happening. And Microsoft is investing in these same types of tools. So the way I see my role is there's a big education component, right? Is like what is actually happening? What do we need to be aware of? How do we prevent these types of bad tool uses? And how do we unlock the confidence so that someone like David feels way less pressure on the level of accountability that's never going to go away, right? So I hope that explains a few fun things about how these models work.
One of the things to one of the things to add, how many IT security CISOs are in the room? One. Okay. So some of these things we've seen before, though, right? So when we hear about prompt injection, we used to deal with SQL injection. Same type of idea, just a different modality. When we hear about this idea of jailbreaking, divide by zero or executing out of memory, right? And so when we start to go through the enumeration of all these AI exploits, the tool is a little bit new, but the exploits are the same. So your CISO should be on top of this. And we're going to have whole new domains of new communities and new partners that are going to help protect us against this. But let's not characterize these things as, oh my gosh, the sky is falling because of AI. No, these are just new modalities of the same things and the same plays that people have been doing in the past.
That's a really good point. And again, I think it's that been there, done that mentality that we need to bring to that, because that helps us not squash it right off the get-go. So John, I'm going to start with you, and we'll come back towards Janak on this one. Where are we going over the next 12 to 24 months? Because I mean, AI is changing rapidly. It's really hard to keep up with it just day to day. But where are we going?
Well, I'll channel a little bit of Bill Gates that we overestimate the near term, we underestimate the long term. And so taking a look at the near term is quite a challenge. I'll channel a little bit of Janak's committee approach to AI solutions. Right, and so we have this mindset of a single, call it a pipeline of AI, from data creation, data cleansing, create the model, create the visualization, and then have that all packaged, what we used to do in AI for fraud prevention detection. Today, we have far more systems that are assembled. Take my predictive AI, put a voice to text in front of it, natural language interface, and I have those pieces. What we see is this assembly being even broader. And so think of you having your management committee, a financial AI, a language AI, HR AI, all there, and then being able to collate their answers to be able to come to a solution. And so we need to be adept and just to be able to do that. I think the second piece that I'm watching very closely and talking with researchers is that law of diminishing returns as we reach peak GPT. And so some are suggesting that the hardware lottery is running thin and that we're going to reach peak GPT. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 6, maybe it's 7, but the law of diminishing returns. So what is the new model of the brain that's going to be used, and what's the hardware to provide that? The model of the brain that we're using today, developed by Jeffrey Hinton, over 25 years old, I would argue it's probably 35 years old or more. So what's that new model look like? I think people are trying to scramble to try to figure that out and figure out how that works. We're on the cusp of quantum, and we see quantum coming into play. We've got our quantum discovery suite, which has almost 100 qubits, logical qubits, and so that's going to really start to change the game because quantum does largely parallel operations. So what does that mean in the environment? I think that's really interesting. I think one last piece I'd add, if you haven't read Power and Prediction by Agarwal, Gaines, and Goldfarb from a Creative Destruction Lab in Toronto, it is a must read for people in the AI domain. It's their second book. I picked it up because they said they got it wrong the first time. And what they talk about is the adoption of general purpose technologies, of being adoption of point solutions, application solutions, and then finally to systemic change. And what I see happening across Canadian business is point solutions, taking AI and replacing robotic process automation. Very simple, self-contained. Application solution, things like copilots and retrieval augmented generation. It's the systemic change that's really, really exciting. And Janak talked about it with that green document or the other one about the systemic change. In order to change our systems of operation, it needs a number of us to work together and change policy and regulation. That's going to be the big thing. That's the people challenge. That's the regulation challenge, not a technology challenge. And so how do we make that whole supply chain work?
Oh, that's good. And then Dave, from your perspective over the next sort of 12 to 24 months, what do you see changing for you and your team and maybe some of the teams out here?
So I think for me, one of the decisions I made very early on in my short stint at the board was I'm going to stick to mostly the Microsoft canned, I call them canned AI products. We're going to generate as much savings in smaller solutions like the transcription. We've got a couple of more use cases, and these use cases have been developed a couple of years ago. I'm just picking them from a drop down, but I think in the next 12 months I'm going to stick to that. But I can see, and we'd have to adjust our principles a little bit on how we start venturing out into other domains and other models and start developing solutions that may tip into that, the adjudicative field. But right now we're going to concentrate on savings from administrative type solutions that'll help us reduce reliance on this 1,000-person group. And yeah, I see that continuing. The one thing I will say, and I wanted to mention this, is that I made another decision very early. I never, ever went out recruited AI talent on the contracting side or on the FTE side. We just decided early, and to use our own people, let them learn it. And frankly, it took a whole bunch of pressure off me just hitting the streets trying to, I actually tried to hire Janak, but he decided to go above me and became a deputy minister. But yeah, that was it. We're going to do this with internal people, and it's really worked out well. And we leverage our stakeholders as well, such as Microsoft.
And then, Dan, what are you seeing over the next 12 to 24 months? And you got to have a front row. You guys, NVIDIA is a huge part of what's happening in a GPU acceleration.
I'll echo what John said, but maybe use the academic words of what's happening. So we started off with prediction, right? Now we're into tasks, the beginnings of Gen AI, task generation. We're seeing the first evidence of reasoning with the O1 models out of OpenAI. And then it becomes planning. So that's the roadmap, right? Prediction, task, reasoning, and then planning. So, same type of roadmap as what John was stating, this path to processes, what Janak showed, right, in terms of these agents in between processes working to bridge the divide. So that's really where we're investing, right? We're starting with models, but then it's moving to workflows. The thing that's happening right now is this idea of multi-agent or agentic-based frameworks this is happening right now. So if you look at Janak's picture, which I was actually, not just because he's sitting beside me, that was the first time I actually saw that slide. I was very impressed. Because the way to abstract each one of those agents, you could probably imagine it's going to be multi-agent, because you're going to want some level of mixture of experts completing some sort of sequence of processes. Because it might not just be a single process, it could be more than that. Because once you peel back the details, there's always more devil in the details. So what we've seen is OpenAI just recently announced Swarm, right, which is a multi-agent framework. If you look at the Meta stack on how they're engaging their developer community, the top of the stack is agentic-based workflows. And NVIDIA most recently, in the beginning of October, announced a very strong joint relationship with Accenture about AI refinery and really helping the community from a GSI and implementation perspective around multi-agent-based workflows. So this is very tangible, very real, very happening. And I want to thank Janak for such an amazing slide that we can talk about.
And Janak,
Seconds, Janak. You go.
Oh, well, there's 29 seconds left. All right. I mean, some of it's been covered. I do agree with exactly what Dan just said. I've said on the podcast, and I stand by it, I think that chat has in some way damaged our perception of the opportunity in front of us. The fact that I, as an individual, need to interrogate a system word by word, limited by my own ability to input the right question and wait for a response to come back, now is getting faster. The tokens are going down the screen faster. The problem is I become the bottleneck. That's the wrong model, and that's why I think it hasn't had its iPhone model. If I want to use this, I want to deploy an agent or agents to go and do something, and I want them to come back, not in 10 seconds, I want them to come back tomorrow. After they've spoken to my team, after they've gone and done all the research, and they've scanned a petabyte of data, and then I want them to come back, collaborate, bring the result back to me, and and then at the start of the day, I'll sit there and I'll look at that report. And that's the way I want to start to interact with these agents. Now, I don't think I can do that in 12 months. I don't think any organization is going to deploy that in 12 months, but that becomes the target state. In 12 months, I simply just want a culture in my organization and in the public service more generally, frankly, is when you're doing a task to not be fearful of getting help and testing your assumptions. And you have to learn to ask the right questions in life, and you have to learn to ask the right questions today, such as, how could I have done this task better? What am I missing? What would my manager say about this situation? What would the deputy think of this? These are good questions that almost nobody asks ChatGPT. They say, make me a PowerPoint, but they don't actually say, tear it apart. And I want people to think like that, because that's going to get the critical thinking, and that's where the model can really help you go a lot farther. So if I can kind of establish the culture by which we're exploring along those lines, I think we'll find, and I fully agree with you, David, find the pain points, eliminate them, eliminate, and what you're going to start to unlock 1% gains at a time is going to be massively transformational. And so don't look for a 10x. Look for a 1.05x. And that's a huge win for your organization, and then replicate.
Yeah, I think it was good perspective. I thought it was good to have both the practical and the manufacturer and the software side of things. I really look at it as we're going to kind of go through 3 phases, and I think there's a couple things limiting it. Sure. The first phase, which I think most people have kind of adopted, is the assistant. AI is going to assist us. It's going to help us collate information, which again is not exciting, but it is functional. I think the second one, where you're really advocating, where Dave, I think you've already gone, is an agent. We're going to take a task, we're going to offload it, and we're going to empower that agent to do something for us. And then the third one is really the role. And where I really like to, again, I think we're all going to be bugging you for that slide, is taking a role and empowering a virtual AI employee to do that role. And there's a couple of things we talked about to sort of limit that. Are the data and the sensitivity of the data it has to interact with, our comfort level. But I think to your point, if we can create a culture that's inquisitive, that's embracing of the change, knowing that at the end of the day, it's getting to those 150,000 interviews that we weren't able to get to. That's the goal. It's not, so anyway, so I really appreciate it. I appreciate the perspective. we're going to have a side argument about whether it's had its iPhone moment. I think that'll be a good one. But you know, again, I really appreciate it. I hope you guys appreciate it. But thank you for coming up here.
What a great discussion. A couple of points that I wrote down, if I may. So Jeanette started us off with AI objective is productivity. Get your data management in order. Securing, managing, and accessing data are the top 3 priorities. Janak spoke about effective processes and how to trust them. How do we measure the information? But the most effective marriage is the AI and the humans. AI is not here to replace our jobs, it's to enhance our jobs. Finally, James, you spoke about innovation, high quality data, and to build your ecosystem and collaborate and share. And then test, and test. And share your results. Finally, what I took from the panel is John wants to be on our podcast. So KJ, take note. The next guest on your podcast should be John. Thanks so much to each and every one of you. Merci tout le monde d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Thank you for today's sponsors, Dell Technologies, Microsoft, APC, and NVIDIA. We look forward to continuing the conversation, and we'll be around whenever you're ready to take the next steps.